The envelope sat on the table like an accusation. 3 words in her careful handwriting: return to sender. Samuel Hartwell stood in his kitchen as dawn broke cold across the Montana Territory. The lamp burned low on the wooden table, its flame trembling in the draft that seeped through the window cracks. Frost painted the glass in delicate patterns. He'd been staring at the letter for 2 days now, unable to believe she meant it. The floorboards creaked behind him. Is Miss Clara coming back? Papa, Willa May stood in the doorway, still in her nightgown. 7 years old, with her mother's dark hair and his own gray eyes. She'd been asking the same question for 2 months. He'd run out of answers that felt true. Samuel looked at his daughter, then at the letter, then toward the window where the sun broke pale and distant over the western ridge. He didn't answer. He set the letter down and walked toward the barn. Willa followed, barefoot on the cold ground, wrapping her shawl tight. She watched him saddle his horse with practiced hand cinch, bridle, bedroll tied behind. He moved with purpose now. The hesitation of the last 2 days burned away by something harder than doubt. Where are you going? She asked. West. He checked the stirrups. To find someone. Miss Clara. He paused, one hand on the saddle horn, and looked at his daughter. Her face held hope so fragile it hurt to see. Miss Clara, he said. He lifted her onto the porch where their neighbor, Martha Doyle, waited to watch her. The old woman's eyes asked the question her mouth didn't. Samuel just nodded once. Martha nodded back. He mounted his horse. Willa stood on the porch, wrapped in her blanket, small against the rising light. He looked back once saw his daughter's face, trusting and afraid all at once. A man's word is his bond. His father had told him once, keep it or die trying. He'd written Clara a letter weeks after she left, told her she belonged, told her to come home. She'd sent it back unopened. Those 3 words written across the seal in ink that might as well have been blood. But a man's word was his bond. The hoofbeats echoed steady as prayer across the frozen yard. He didn't look back again. The road stretched empty before him. Samuel had ridden it 100 times for cattle or supplies, but never for a woman who didn't want to be found. The afternoon sun hung pale behind gray clouds. Wind cut sharp through the pine country, carrying the smell of coming snow. His horse moved steady beneath him, used to long days and rough country. Samuel let the rhythm settle his thoughts. He'd met Clara Brennan 6 months ago, though it felt like another lifetime now. She'd arrived as a traveling healer, hired by a neighbor to tend a sick child 3 ranches over. She'd passed his place on her way and seen Willa May feverish on the porch, face flushed with heat that had nothing to do with summer sun. Clara had stopped without asking payment. She stayed 3 days, nursing his daughter through the fever with cool cloths and herbal teas and a gentle presence that made the house feel less empty than it had since Sarah died. Willa recovered, Clara smiled, and somehow she never left. She stayed through the summer mending, teaching Willa to read, planting a garden that bloomed wild and beautiful. She shared their meals and their silence and the quiet rhythm of days that felt, for the first time in 3 years, like living instead of just surviving. Samuel had fallen in love watching her braid his daughter's hair. He'd fallen in love hearing her laugh at Willa's stories. He'd fallen in love with the way she looked at sunrise, standing in the doorway with coffee in her hands like she belonged there. Then one September morning, she was gone. No warning, no argument. Just a note on the table in that same careful handwriting, I don't belong here. Forget me. See, Samuel had waited a week, thinking she'd come back. Then another. By the 3rd week, he'd written the letter short, honest, desperate. You belong, come home. He'd sent it to the town she'd mentioned once, the place she said she came from. Sweetwater Creek, 2 weeks' ride west. It came back unopened. Returned to sender. Samuel pulled the letter from his coat now, the envelope worn from handling. He couldn't bring himself to leave it behind, though he didn't know why. Maybe proof. Maybe penance. He tucked it away and looked ahead at the empty road. You carved toys for my daughter, he said to the wind. You taught her to read. You made us whole." His voice carried into the pines and vanished. "If you think I'm not coming, you don't know Montana men." The road bent west. He followed it. Rain hit the trail like judgment. 3 days into the journey, Samuel woke to gray skies and a wind that promised storms. By noon, the promise delivered. Water fell in sheets, turning the mountain pass into a river of mud. He dismounted and led his horse carefully through terrain that could kill them both if he wasn't careful. His coat soaked through within the first hour. Cold seeped into his bones. Progress slowed to a crawl. By late afternoon, he found an overhang, barely shelter, but enough to keep the worst of it off. He tied his horse and crouched beneath the rock, water dripping from his hat brim, hands numb. This was foolish. 2 weeks of hard riding for a woman who'd made her feelings clear. She didn't want him, didn't want his daughter, didn't want the life they'd offered. Maybe I should turn back. The thought came quiet and reasonable. He had a ranch to run, a daughter who needed him, responsibilities that didn't include chasing ghosts across the territory. He reached into his saddlebag for jerky, and his hand found something else. The wooden horse. Small, intricate, carved with a skill that spoke of patience and love. Clara had made it for Willa May. Sitting by the fire one evening with a piece of pine and a small knife. She'd worked for 3 nights, shaping ears and mane and hooves with careful precision. Willa had cried when Clara gave it to her, when Samuel had saddled up to leave. Willa had pressed the toy into his hands. "Take it, Papa." "So Miss Clara knows we still have it." Samuel held it now, rain drumming overhead, and understood. Clara hadn't left because she didn't care. She'd left because she cared too much and thought she wasn't worthy of it. She'd run from love the way wounded animals run from kindness, not from cruelty, but from fear of the cost. She's scared. He realized, not heartless, just scared. The rain didn't matter. The cold didn't matter. The miles ahead didn't matter. He mounted his horse again, tucking the toy carefully into his coat pocket. "The land don't lie. Neither should a man," he muttered, the words his father had taught him. Words he'd lived by all his life. "I'm coming. Clara, ready or not." Lightning split the sky ahead. Thunder rolled after. He rode toward both. The trading post appeared like Providence, one light burning steady against the coming dark. Samuel had been riding 7 days. The storm had passed, but it left him hollow and aching, the kind of tired that settles into bones and doesn't leave. When he saw the lamplight glowing through the dusk, he nearly wept with relief. The building was small log walls, a porch sagging on one side, smoke rising from a stone chimney. A painted sign read, "Hail Trading Post," in letters worn almost to nothing. Samuel dismounted and tied his horse beside 2 others already there. The door opened before he could knock. An old woman stood in the frame, small and sturdy, with white hair pulled back and eyes that missed nothing. "Storm's coming," she said. "You'll want shelter." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Samuel said, "I'd be grateful." "Then get in here before you freeze." Inside. Warmth hit him like a physical thing. A fire crackled in the hearth. The room smelled of coffee and venison and wood smoke. An old man sat by the fire, weathered as driftwood, with a long beard and hands that had worked a lifetime. "Walter," the woman called. "See to his horse." The man stood without complaint and headed outside. The woman pointed Samuel toward the fire. "Sit. I'm Helen Hale. That's my husband. You'll eat and sleep here tonight. No argument." Samuel wanted to protest, but his body had other ideas. He sat. She brought him coffee in a tin cup, then a bowl of stew that tasted better than anything he'd had in a week. Walter returned, shaking rain from his coat. "Good horse you got, fed and watered." "Thank you," Samuel said. They ate in comfortable silence for a time. Then Helen asked, "Where you headed with such determination?" Samuel hesitated, then told them, The whole story, Clara. The letter. The 2 weeks of riding. He didn't know why he was telling strangers, except that Helen's eyes were kind, and he was too tired to lie. When he finished, Walter nodded slowly. The land don't lie. Neither should a man. You're doing right. Helen leaned forward. Women carry shame we don't deserve. Someone hurt that girl long before you knew her, told her she wasn't enough. Sometimes a man's got to ride clear across the territory to tell her the truth. What'll you say when you find her? Helen asked. Samuel thought about it. That she belongs. That we're waiting. That love don't quit just because someone's scared. Walter smiled into his beard. That'll do. That'll do just fine. Samuel left at dawn. Helen packed extra provisions, pressed them into his hands. For when you bring her home, she said. Not if. When. The blessing warmed him more than the fire had. He rode into the day with her words following. The next storm hit an hour later, rain and wind and cold that cut through everything. He didn't slow down. The line shack leaked in 3 places. Samuel didn't care. He was out of the storm, and that was enough. He built a small fire, tended his horse in the attached lean-to, then sat alone with the sound of rain hammering the roof. 10 days on the trail now. 3 more. If the weather held and his information was right, 3 more days to Sweetwater Creek. He pulled the letter from his coat. The paper had softened from handling, the ink beginning to blur at the edges. He'd read it 100 times since she'd sent it back, but he read it again now, speaking the words aloud to the empty room. Clara, Willa asks for you every night. I tell her you had to go, but I don't believe it. I think you're scared. I think someone told you once you weren't enough. They lied. Come home. We're waiting. Samuel. His voice was the only sound besides the rain. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. 3 more days. He'd make it. Had to. 200 miles west, in a small room above a boarding house in Sweetwater Creek. Clara Brennan sat by lamplight and sewed. Her hands moved with practiced precision, stitching a hem on a dress she'd been hired to mend. The work was steady if not fulfilling. She'd been in Sweetwater Creek for 2 months now, living quiet and small, speaking to no one of where she'd come from or why. The room held almost nothing. A bed, a table, a chair, her sewing basket. She'd learned long ago not to accumulate things that would be hard to carry when it was time to leave, because it was always time to leave. Eventually, she set down her sewing and picked up the blue ribbon lying beside her work. Willa May had given it to her the morning before she left, pressed it into her hands with small fingers and eyes that trusted absolutely. So you don't forget me, Miss Clara. As if she could forget. Clara held the ribbon and felt tears slide hot down her face. She'd been crying more lately. Not loud, dramatic crying, just this quiet leak of grief that came at night when there was no one to see. A knock at the door made her jump. Clara, Mrs. Agnes Brennan, her landlady. You all right in there? Clara wiped her face quickly. Yes, ma'am. I'm fine. The door opened anyway. Agnes was 60-something, kind but no nonsense, with gray hair and eyes that saw too much. She looked at Clara's face and frowned. You're crying again. I'm fine. Clara repeated. Agnes sat uninvited on the edge of the bed. You've been here 2 months, and I've seen you cry more nights than not. That's not fine. Clara looked away. It's nothing. Nothing don't make a woman cry like her heart's breaking. Agnes paused. You left someone, didn't you? Someone who mattered? The words came before Clara could stop them. I left people I loved. I thought it was mercy. Now I think it was cowardice. Then why don't you go back? Clara laughed, bitter and hollow. Because they deserve better than me. Agnes studied her. Seems to me that's their decision, not yours. She left before Clara could answer. Clara sat alone again, holding the ribbon, staring at nothing. The lamp flickered. Rain began to fall outside. The same storm that soaked Samuel 100 miles east. Neither knew the other was suffering the same wound from opposite sides. Neither knew the distance between them was shrinking with every mile. But the rain knew. And the road knew. And dawn would come regardless. Sweetwater Creek wasn't much one street. 2 saloons, a church, a handful of shops. But Clara was here. And that made it everything. Samuel reached the town at midday, 2 weeks after leaving home. He was exhausted, mud-covered, his beard grown in rough and unkempt. But he'd made it. He stopped at the general store first. The shopkeeper, a thin man with spectacles, looked him over with the wariness reserved for strangers. "I'm looking for someone." Samuel said, "A woman, Clara Brennan. Dark hair, quiet, probably keeps to herself." The shopkeeper's expression shifted slightly. "I know her. Seamstress. Rents a room at Mrs. Brennan's boarding house. Down the street. White building." Samuel's heart hammered. "Thank you." He stood outside the boarding house for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. 2 weeks had led to this. Everything led to this. He climbed the steps and knocked. The woman who answered was older, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that assessed him immediately. "Help you? My name's Samuel Hartwell," he said. "I'm here to see Clara Brennan. Tell her I rode from Montana." The woman, Mrs. Brennan. He assumed studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "Wait here." She disappeared inside. Samuel stood on the porch, hat in hands, trying not to hope too hard. 5 minutes passed. They felt like hours. Mrs. Brennan returned. Her expression told him everything before her words did. "She says to go home. She won't see you." The words hit like a fist. Samuel stared at her, disbelieving. "She won't see me." That's what she said. "But his voice cracked. "Can I just talk to her just for a moment?" Mrs. Brennan's face softened slightly. She glanced back toward the stairs, then at Samuel. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. "She's crying up there. Has been since I told her you came. That's not a woman who wants you gone. That's a woman who thinks she doesn't deserve you to stay." Samuel looked up at the second-floor windows. One showed lamplight flickering. A shadow passed across it, brief, unmistakable. His heart broke and mended in the same moment. He walked down the steps slowly, stood in the street beside his horse. He could leave, ride home, respect her wishes. He looked up at her window again. Then he sat down on the boarding house steps. Mrs. Brennan opened the door. "What are you doing?" Samuel looked at her steadily. "Waiting. For what?" "As long as it takes." She studied him a long moment, then nodded once and went back inside. Samuel settled against the railing. The sun moved across the sky. People passed, gave him curious looks, moved on. He didn't care. Around midnight, Mrs. Brennan brought him coffee. Around 2 in the morning, she brought a blanket. He accepted both gratefully but didn't move. The lamplight in Clara's window never went out. She wasn't sleeping either, and so he waited. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and cold. Samuel waited anyway. He'd been sitting on the boarding house steps for 6 hours now. His back ached. His legs had gone numb. The night air cut through his coat with edges sharp enough to draw blood. He didn't move. Clara's lamplight burned steady in the window above. He watched it like a man watching a lighthouse in a storm, the only fixed point in a world that wouldn't stop. Moving. Maybe I'm a fool, he thought. Maybe love makes men foolish. But he'd ridden 2 weeks through rain and doubt and cold. He'd slept in line shacks and traded posts and under open sky. He'd crossed mountains and rivers and miles of emptiness. He could wait one more night. In her room, Clara paced. She'd been pacing for hours, wearing a path in the narrow space between bed and window. Agnes had told her twice that he was still there, still waiting, still refusing to leave. You rode 2 weeks, Agnes had said, exasperated and impressed in equal measure. He's sitting on my steps in the cold. What more proof do you need? But proof wasn't the problem. Clara believed he'd come, believed he cared. That was what terrified her. She'd learned young not to hope for permanence. Her parents had died when she was 5. Fever took them both within a week. After that came the relatives. Aunt Sarah, who kept her for a year before passing her to Aunt Margaret. Cousin Thomas, who tolerated her for 6 months before sending her to Uncle John. Each one made it clear she was a burden, a charity case, someone to be endured, not loved. By 15, she'd stopped expecting anything different. When she'd found herself at Samuel's ranch, healing his daughter, staying for 1 day and then another and then a summer, she'd waited for the moment he'd realized she wasn't worth keeping. But that moment never came. He'd looked at her like she mattered. Willa had called for her at night like she was already family. And Clara had been happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in her life. That was when the fear came. This won't last. The voice in her head whispered, they'll see who you really are. They'll send you away. It's better to leave first. So she had. Now he was here, on her landlady's steps, in the cold, refusing to leave. Clara pressed her forehead against the window glass and closed her eyes. Dawn broke gray and pale. The lamp in her room had burned down to nothing. She opened the door. Samuel stood immediately, stiff from hours of sitting. He turned to face her. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, eyes red from crying, face pale with exhaustion and fear. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, and his voice came steady, despite everything. I shouldn't have let you leave. Silence stretched between them, electric and full of all the words they hadn't said. 2 weeks of rain. 2 months of loneliness. Years of wounds that had nothing to do with each other, but everything to do with why they were standing here. Now, I'm not... Clara's voice broke. I'm not what you think I am. I have nothing. No family. No name that matters. I'm just... You're the woman my daughter calls for in her sleep. Samuel interrupted gently. You're the one who taught her to read. You're the one I wrote to every night in my head after you left. That's who you are. Clara stared at him. A tear escaped. Then another. Come in, she whispered. Samuel followed her inside. The room held almost nothing. A bed, a table, a chair, sparse and temporary, like she'd been ready to disappear at any moment. Samuel stood just inside the door while Clara made coffee with shaking hands. The silence between them felt fragile. One wrong word could shatter it. She handed him a cup. They sat. The small table between them. I need to tell you something, Clara said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. About why I left. Samuel nodded. I'm listening. She took a breath. I was 5 when my parents died. Fever took them both. After that, I went to live with my aunt. She kept me for a year, then sent me to another aunt, then a cousin, then an uncle. I lived in 7 different houses before I turned 15. Her hands tightened around her cup. Every one of them made it clear I was a burden, something to be tolerated, not wanted. I learned not to settle in, not to hope things would last, because they never did. Samuel listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. When I came to your ranch, she paused, gathering courage. When I stayed that summer, I was happy, truly happy. Willa needed me. You... Her voice caught. You looked at me like I mattered, like I belonged there. You did belong, Samuel said quietly. I know. Clara's tears fell freely now. That's what scared me. I kept waiting for the moment you'd realize I wasn't enough. That you'd send me away like everyone else. So I left first, before you could... She looked up at him, eyes raw with pain. I thought it was mercy. I thought I was protecting you both from the disappointment of keeping me. Samuel set down his cup. He pulled the letter from his coat, the one she'd returned unopened, and placed it on the table between them. I wrote this 3 weeks after you left, he said. I want you to know what it says, even if you never read it. Clara stared at the envelope. It says that Willa asks for you every night, that I don't believe you wanted to leave, that I think someone told you once you weren't enough, and they lied. His voice stayed steady, quiet, but every word carried weight. It says to come home, that we're waiting. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out the wooden horse, the one Clara had carved for Willa May. He set it beside the letter. She made me bring this, said you'd know we still have it. Clara broke. She covered her face with her hands and wept deep, shaking sobs that she'd been holding back for months. Samuel moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. He didn't touch her, just stayed close while she cried out years of grief and fear. When she could breathe again, she looked at him through her tears. What if I fail you? She whispered. Then we'll fail together. Samuel said, but I don't think you will. What if Willa forgets me? She asks about you every single night. She's not forgetting. He paused. Neither am I. Clara looked at the toy horse. The letter. This man who'd ridden 2 weeks through storms to tell her she belonged. She reached across the space between them. Her hand found his. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. The yes was in her touch. Samuel's fingers closed around hers, gentle and sure. Come home, he said. Clara nodded. Yes, 2 horses side by side on the morning road. The journey that began alone would end together. They left Sweetwater Creek at dawn. Agnes Brennan stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them prepare to ride. She'd packed provisions the night before: bread, dried meat, coffee, and refused payment. Go on, girl, Agnes said to Clara. Love like that doesn't wait forever. And he already proved he'll wait as long as you need. Clara embraced her, the only friend she'd had in her exile. Thank you, she whispered. Agnes patted her back. Write to me when you're settled. They rode out as the town woke. Samuel on his gelding, Clara on a mare Agnes had insisted she take. The morning air was crisp and clean, autumn giving way slowly to winter, but not yet cold enough to bite. The trail east felt different than the trail west had. Samuel had ridden to Sweetwater Creek in silence and doubt. They rode home in conversation in something that felt remarkably like joy. Clara asked about the ranch, how many head of cattle, what the neighbors were like, whether the garden had survived without her. Samuel answered each question, watching her face come alive with interest. She laughed at his story about the rooster that terrorized the barn cat. The sound made his chest ache in the best way. I forgot how that sounded, he said. What? You laughing? She smiled at him, shy and genuine. I forgot too. They made camp the first night beside a creek. Samuel built a fire while Clara unpacked the food Agnes had sent. They ate quietly, watching stars emerge overhead. Do you think Willa will be angry? Clara asked. That I left. Samuel considered it. She'll have questions, but she's 7. She forgives easy, especially people she loves. Clara stared into the fire. I love her too, so much it scared me. I know, Samuel said. That's why I came looking. The second day, they passed the line shack where Samuel had sheltered during the storm. He pointed it out, told her about waiting out the weather, about the moment he'd found the wooden horse in his saddlebag, and understood why she'd left. I want to meet them, Clara said. Walter and Helen, the couple who blessed your journey. We will, Samuel promised. We've got time now. The promise settled between them, casual but profound. Time. Future. Days that stretched ahead without fear of ending. The third day brought them over the final ridge. Samuel's ranch spread below the house. The barn. the corrals and pastures he'd built with his own hands. Smoke rose from the chimney. Martha Doyle was still there, watching Willa. Clara's breath caught. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. It's better with you in it, Samuel said. They rode down together. The front door opened. Willa May appeared on the porch, saw them coming, and froze for one perfect moment of recognition. Then she screamed high and joyful and ran barefoot across the yard. Miss Clara, Miss Clara. Clara barely had time to dismount before the child launched herself into her arms. Clara caught her, held her tight, and felt something inside her chest that had been broken for years finally begin to heal. You came back. Willa sobbed into her shoulder. Papa said you would, but I was scared you wouldn't. I'm here. Sweetness. Clara was crying again, but these tears felt different. I'm here. Are you staying this time? Clara looked up at Samuel over Willa's head. He'd dismounted and stood a few feet away, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite name. Yes, Clara said. I'm staying. Willa pulled back, grabbed Clara's hand, and dragged her toward the house. I have so much to tell you. The chickens had babies and I learned a new song and Papa burned the biscuits every single time and her. Voice faded as they disappeared inside. Samuel stood in the yard, alone with the horses, and felt something in his chest unclench for the first time in months. Martha appeared on the porch, smiling. Looks like you found her. I did. She's staying. She's staying. Martha nodded once, satisfied. Good. That child needs a mother. And you need to stop burning biscuits. She left them to settle in. Samuel tended the horses, taking his time with the work. When he finally went inside, he found Clara and Willa sitting at the kitchen table. Willa was talking non-stop, showing Clara drawings she'd made, a rock collection, the wooden horse that now sat in the center of the table like a shrine. Clara looked up when he entered. Their eyes met across the room, a moment of understanding that needed no words. We're home, her expression said. Yes, his answered. We are. That night, after Willa had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from excitement, Samuel and Clara sat on the porch. The stars burned cold and bright overhead, somewhere far away. In a room above a boarding house in Sweetwater Creek, a letter sat forgotten on an empty table. The words written inside it no longer mattered. The important ones had been spoken face to face. Clara reached for Samuel's hand. He took it, their fingers intertwining. Thank you, she said quietly, for not giving up. A man's word is his bond, Samuel said. I told you that you belonged, had to prove it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, wind in the pines, an owl calling somewhere distant, the soft creak of the porch boards beneath them. The road home had been long, 2 weeks of rain and cold and doubt, miles that felt endless while he was riding them, but every mile had been worth it. Inside the house, Willa May slept peacefully for the first time in months, dreaming of gardens and wooden horses and a woman who'd promised to stay. Outside, two people who'd been broken in different ways sat together and began the slow, patient work of healing. The stars wheeled overhead. Dawn would come, and when it did, they'd face it together. Home, Clara thought. Home. Samuel agreed, though she hadn't spoken aloud. The words settled between them like a prayer answered, like a promise kept, like the first warm breath of spring after the longest winter. Home.